What's up, everyone? I hope you're all doing fantastic. To get us started today, we've got this tweet from Riz XRP. He says that this Ripple versus SEC lawsuit is the case of the century, just as John Deaton shares. This case is huge. It might as well determine the fate of the crypto world moving forward. Listen in.
This decision gets bigger and bigger. So I just want you to think about those of you out there who are thinking about this. Why hasn't she ruled yet? What I doubt very seriously that Judge Torres has ever felt the pressure that she's feeling right now. Ripple is sending, hey, Judge, look what the judge in Voyager said. Look what the Judge Gorsuch at the Supreme Court said about fair notice. All of these things are happening after. She's getting more information. Look at the SEC's conduct. Look at Binance. Look at the CFTC. All of this stuff is happening in the background where you got guys like me saying the regulatory clarity is going to come from her. You got the library decision. You don't think she's aware of all this? So this decision is as big of a decision that this judge has ever faced. Think about it. What other decision is as big as this decision when it comes to global trade and finance in modern history? I've said before that this case is the most significant non-fraud SEC enforcement action since 1946. So, at that kind of pressure, personally, I don't blame Judge Torres for being very careful of how she words this decision because A, if it goes against Ripple, she knows it's going up to a conservative court, and if it's for Ripple, she has to justify it and all those things. So just be patient. We're almost at the end. Everybody have a great night. See you next week.
As always, welcome back to Money Side, your favorite crypto news channel. If you're new here, we welcome you to the XRP Army. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. That way you don't miss out on our daily crypto news updates. More interesting news today. We've got yet another interesting update. It comes to us from Crypto Airy. She says that if you were a little fuzzy about how RippleNet works or how the XRP ledger on-demand liquidity works to solve a real problem, one of my favorite people explains it in this quick clip. Listen to this hot scoop from Navin Blockchain.
So let me just make it very easy, right? So basically in RippleNet, two nodes, let's say node A and node B. Let's just, for simplicity, just take their two banks. They want to speak to each other. They are able to speak to each other almost like WhatsApp, right? So in our technology, what they're able to do is they're able to put the address of bank B. And let's assume the bank B says, I'm okay to accept messages from bank A, like what we do in WhatsApp. Once our phone numbers are there, we accept the person. Then the bank A can communicate with bank B. So let's assume Arjun is the customer of bank A. He says, hey, you know what? I want to send money to Naveen, who's the customer of bank B. The first thing will happen is just a message will go from bank A to bank B. Hey, Arjun wants to send money to Naveen. Are you open to accepting this money? And bank B can essentially look at my bank account and essentially say my bank account is active and I'm a good person and AML and all the KYC checks are done. He says, yeah, you know what? Arjun's money can travel to Naveen from bank A to bank B. So the thumbs up is given. And then the moment Arjun presses enter, your account will get it debited, and in a few seconds, the account of Naveen will get credited and everybody can go home. So just for example, one of the biggest benefit is even before the debit happens, we are able to pre-clear a transaction, which means we are able to do the checks on the transaction. We can make sure that indeed the account is not closed and any other checks that need to be done by institution A or institution B. Because, for example, one of the biggest problem today for Arjun is, let's assume by mistake, he puts Naveen's last name as a different name, that the transaction will go in a black hole, and it'll maybe take you 7 days to find out, hey, you know what, by mistake, instead of putting Gupta, I put John, right? I put something else, right? And that's a big problem. So that's just on the information exchange side. The second thing happens on the transfer of value side. And here it's important to understand that banks have used something called as Nostro account. The easiest way to think about it would be working capital for banks. So exactly the same scenario. Let's assume bank A, whose customer are in currency, let's say GBP, when they want to send money into Philippines peso, what they would do is they would park very large sum of money. So let's assume they would park on a Friday evening, $5 million equivalent in Philippines peso, which is essentially kept with bank B. And then when Arjun walks in, gives his 1000 GBP, then that gets debited and the Philippines peso account gets credited. And these keeps happening with hundreds of transactions till that $5 million equivalent gets exhausted. Now, people ask me all the time, why are cross-border remittances so expensive? They are very expensive because somebody's bearing the capital cost of this $5 million equivalent. Somebody's bearing the depreciation risk of this $5 million equivalent, and somebody's waiting for the customers to come in one by one, so that this amount slowly gets depleted, right? And I think you already know this, that cross-border payments sometimes can be between 2 to 7% of the principal value. That means if you're sending $200, $14 will be taken away between these costs. And the biggest cost is liquidity cost. In the case of using ODL, on-demand liquidity, the solution that's started by Ripple, there is zero Nostro account balances that are required. So exactly what is going to happen is GBP in real time will get converted to XRP. XRP within 2 seconds will travel to Philippines, and in Philippines, it'll get converted to Philippines peso and the payout will happen. And this can happen throughout the day.
There's no need to create
Nostro accounts. It happens 24/7, real time, with real time rates on both the sides. The execution is very fast. There is almost nil friction, and there is zero working capital that is required. That means all this cost, which was inherent in the parallel system, can now go back to the customers, and then we can all essentially enjoy much cheaper, faster, and more efficient remittances.
In another update from Watcher Guru, we see that former U.S. President Trump says the U.S. currency is crashing and will soon no longer be the world standard.
Our currency is crashing and will soon no longer be the world standard, which will be our greatest defeat, frankly, in 200 years. There will be no defeat like that. That will take us away from being even a great power.
Another exciting update coming to us from Digital Asset Investor. Never forget, everything you are watching goes on with BRICS, and the countries wanting to stop using the dollar were publicly wargamed in 2019 by the same people that are running the U.S. show now. I've always wondered, if they were wargaming it, then publicly, what have they been doing privately behind the scenes for possible decades? There is a lot more going on.
So, well, I respect this. Secretary of Treasury says we should harden SWIFT. I frankly don't think that's going to address the real policy, and we're losing the tools. Sorry to say this, Secretary Carter. We're losing the tools. If we keep using SWIFT for secondary sanctions, and on this,
15 years.
but what the
We've
difference...
got a lot of good use out of them in the meantime.
Absolutely, but I think the runway is shortening. I think it's just shortening, and we've seen this right here in this circumstance that North Korea could have evaded sanctions, as the Secretary of Treasury said, just because they can move things across the border. But this new competition to SWIFT is real, so I concur that we should back away from secondary sanctions. And we also have to realize we have to stiffen up other tools, because SWIFT, we're in the waning days of this geopolitical tool. Secondly, as the currency director said, currency director said, is we have been leapfrogged by others, by digital currency, by digital Chinese currency. Why? Because frankly, our central bank has been slow, and there's an appointment coming in January of 22. The president's got to decide whether to change over who's leading the Federal Reserve, whether we need some new leadership there that can move us both domestically and internationally so that we could really be competing actively. That our U.S. currency system, it's under the Secretary of Treasury, but the Federal Reserve runs our payment system. I think we need to move that Federal Reserve into the modern era. So those would be my recommendations.
From a recap that was shared by Riz XRP, we can see that 95% of the digital assets we have today possibly aren't solving real problems. Once XRP, which has great utility, is freed from this lawsuit, nothing will stop what's coming. It will take off like a rocket ship.
So let me just carry on with that thought, right? So I'm just going to recap what I've just heard, right? So a lot of money came very quickly into blockchain. With all that money came all that expectation. All that expectation led to a number of projects which people wanted to justify to, I guess, validate the fact that the sector needed the kind of money which was invested. Some of those projects, or 95% of those projects, are possibly not solving any real problems, so therefore they're not of value, and therefore that's leading to slower adoption. Payments and gaming is two areas where you see early adoption. If I come back to payments for a second, what needs to happen to see greater adoption of blockchain, right, in the payment sector?
The single biggest thing that needs to happen is recognition from the regulators to essentially say, hey, here are the rules of the road, the AML, KYC, the norms that you essentially need to take care of. But after that, this particular use case can essentially take off in a country. So the only thing we need is regulatory clarity that essentially digital assets or cryptos can essentially be used to move value cross-border from point A to point B. And that's it. After that, there is nothing else that's required. Companies like us and many other companies will essentially just take this use case like a rocket ship.
And now on to wind up on today's video. As seen from a video shared by the Digital Asset Investor, we can see attorney Jeremy Hogan explain why the SEC won't appeal. There's no benefit to the SEC in appealing the lawsuit between Ripple and the SEC. That's because if the case goes up to the Second Circuit and the Second Circuit rules against the SEC, now that will become the binding precedent, and the SEC is screwed as far as any other lawsuit that they would like to bring. So it's more likely that the SEC won't appeal if they lose the lawsuit against Ripple, since they don't want to mess up their whole agenda in enforcing this regulation against the entire crypto space. Therefore, the only way we could get the Ripple test in this lawsuit is if Ripple loses at the trial court level and appeals to the Second Circuit Court, because then Ripple will do it. After all, they have the money and incentive to do it, and they will want the Second Circuit to say no, and then the Howey test will be replaced with the Ripple test. If it works out that way, we will need an investment contract actually to have a contract.
Right. So your initial statement is correct. A settlement, there's no appeal of a settlement, of course. The problem with the settlement is it has no effect on any other cases in the space, right? So if Ripple settles with the SEC, it has absolutely no effect on the SEC's next lawsuit against another crypto company. So in a sense, it's good for Ripple, but a settlement between the SEC and Ripple is bad for crypto.
Correct.
Because in the past, remember, every lawsuit that the SEC has brought in the past against these companies, no one has really been able to put up a fight. I mean, Library put up a fight, but they only had like $1 million to fight the SEC, which in the legal world is not a lot of money. Ripple's put $100 million into fighting the SEC. And the facts for Ripple are pretty good, better than for most crypto projects. So this is the case where the SEC could be, what they're doing could be put to an end with the Ripple case, because that will then be the end of the SEC being able to make some of these arguments they've been making in the past. So if Ripple settles, all of that money for the crypto space is wasted. Now, they would have to do what's in the best interest of the company, but at the same time, it's not going to have any effect as far as the other, as far as crypto in general. If the judge rules in Ripple's favor, I do not think the SEC is going to appeal. And the reason I say that is because there's no benefit to the SEC to appeal, because if the case then goes up to the Second Circuit in the appellate court and the Second Circuit rules against the SEC, now that becomes binding precedent. And the SEC is screwed as far as any other lawsuits that they want to bring. So if I'm the SEC, and I'm 90% sure this is what they would do, and they lose, there won't be an appeal, because they don't want to mess up their whole agenda here in enforcing these regulations against the crypto space. So in my mind, the only way we get the Ripple test is if Ripple loses at the trial court level, appeals it up to the Second Circuit, because then Ripple will do it because they have the money and they have the incentive to do it. And they're going to want the Second Circuit to say, no, we're going to replace the Howey test with the Ripple test, and we're going to require an investment contract to actually have a contract. So that's how that would all work. Now, time-wise, we get the judge's decision, let's say in April or May. The Second Circuit wouldn't be hearing it till next year. And if it goes up to the U.S. Supreme Court from there to really replace the Howey test, we're talking 2 to 3 more years from there.
As always, do your own research and always trade safely. Please keep in mind, we're not a licensed financial advisor. All videos on this channel are intended for entertainment purposes only. Let us know what you think in the comment section below, and let's have a conversation. Thank you as always for watching. Don't forget to like this video. Please click on that subscribe button below and turn on notifications so you get informed when we drop new video. We'll look forward to seeing you on the next Money Side.